Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. Party like it's 1980, Purdue fans. For the first time since 1980, Purdue is headed to the Final Four. The Boilermakers got past Tennessee in the Elite Eight and now are headed to Phoenix to take on NC State in the Final Four. The Boilermakers are 2 wins away from the first national championship in program history. I'm going to break down the win over Tennessee today with a lot of thoughts about the significance of the win, a lot of thoughts about the significance of reaching the Final Four for the first time in 44 years. We will preview all the happenings in Phoenix, the Boilermakers and Wolfpack. What do UConn and Alabama have to offer in the nightcap? All of that here today, and I will answer your questions. As expected, got a lot of them. Thank you to everyone who sent those in. Remember, you can always send in questions for the show anytime on Twitter, @BoilersBeyond. Follow, give me a DM, tweet at me. You can also email your questions to boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. And be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you don't miss a thing. There's going to be a lot to talk about with the fallout of whatever happens in Phoenix as we move into an off season starting next week, no matter what happens. So be sure to follow so you don't miss a thing. But look, Purdue advances to the Final Four, as I said, the first time since 1980, as you are all painfully aware. But Purdue finally did it with a 72-66 win over Tennessee. I'm not going to spend a ton of time breaking this game down. We're going to talk about it. I think anyone who listens to this podcast watched the game. It's been over 48 hours now for logistical reasons. Kind of had to wait till now to get this recorded, but it works out all right to do one big episode here. Purdue 72, Tennessee 66. A really, really good basketball game. You know, I know these two teams don't necessarily have a style of play combination that lends itself to the most visually appealing basketball game. You know, Tennessee is very, very physical, and there is nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that being your MO and the way you want to play. And with Purdue, you know, Purdue really wanted to pound the ball inside. Purdue fed the post as much in that game as Purdue has all season. In terms of traditional post feeds, Purdue did it more than Purdue had all season. So you had a very physical, very inside game where Zach Edey draws 16 fouls. You know, where Braden Smith draws 5. Purdue draws 25 fouls in the game. So, you know, it's not the most visually appealing, but those were 2 really, really high-level teams. Tennessee's really good. Dalton Knecht is an absolute star. He is phenomenal. To get that game, Zach Edey versus Dalton Knecht, probably the 2 best players in the country, in the Elite Eight, is a real treat for college basketball. The Elite Eight lends itself, it creates itself a really, really cool environment because you almost always have 2 really good teams, and you certainly did in this case. When it's a higher seeded team, you know, you have 1 seeds and 2 seeds, geographically, it tends to be all right, you know, where that top seed has a decent home court advantage with, you know, at least with the crowd advantage. It's in a basketball arena. It's not in a football stadium like the Final Four. So that helps make it really cool. It was a good environment. It really was. Purdue fans showed out well as expected. Tennessee fans certainly did their part. They weren't, you know, they weren't the majority, but the ones that showed up were loud. It was a really cool environment. It's a really good Tennessee defense. I mean, Tennessee, as of right now, sits 3rd in the nation in adjusted defensive efficiency. That's excellent. That's a great defense that Purdue was able to solve to some degree. You got to give Purdue some credit for fighting through a poor shooting day. Purdue finishes the game 3 of 15 from outside. And a lot of those 3-point attempts came in the first half. Purdue took, I guess, 8 in the first half, 7 in the second half, but it felt late in the game. And I tweeted this. At one point, it was a little concerning that Purdue didn't seem like it really wanted to shoot from outside. There were some good looks that Purdue had that it simply didn't take, that it passed up. And I thought that was a little bit concerning at times because you've seen that happen to Purdue before, not this year as much, but in years past where no one wanted to be that guy that took the shot, they defaulted to Zach Edey. It ended up working out for Purdue for the most part. Lance Jones hits a massive shot with 2 minutes and change to go. He hits a 3 to put Purdue up 6. Lance Jones has this uncanny ability to do that. I've talked about it for a couple of months now, and it's not always that situation. It's not always where Lance Jones hits a shot late in the game that propels Purdue to victory. Sometimes it's in the first half when the opponent is on a run and Purdue just needs to snap it. Or it's right before half against Utah State. Purdue wants to close with a statement, so he banks in a 3. It's stuff like that. It really big times. He has the ability to really, really make shots at a rare level. And that was big. That was as big as it gets there. If you're a Purdue fan, you certainly didn't feel great when Purdue was down 11 in the first half. But when Purdue closed that half on a nice run and took a lead into the locker room, you had to feel all right about where Purdue was. Because Tennessee started off on fire. Tennessee made a bunch of threes, 7 of 13 from 3-point range in the first half. That's the difference. That's what kept Tennessee alive. And in the second half, it cooled off a little bit. Connect was tremendous, but outside of him, there wasn't a lot going on for Tennessee in that second half. And Purdue ultimately was able to pull away a little bit. There were some times in that second half when it felt like Purdue was going to pull away more, when Purdue was going to not run away with it, but you thought Purdue might get that thing by double digits, that if Tennessee didn't go on a bit of a run, that Purdue had it. That was never the case. Tennessee didn't quit. Tennessee never backed away. Tennessee tied the game a bunch in the second half and had it tied, had it tied a number of times pretty late. But ultimately, Purdue ended up leading for the majority of the game. Purdue was the better team, and Purdue got the win. What Zach Edey has done in this NCAA tournament is out of this world. It's an all-time March Madness run. It's probably, unless Purdue wins the national championship, I don't know that it's going to be remembered as some all-time March Madness run, like nationally. It should be. But when you're the National Player of the Year like that, it's kind of expected. Again, it probably shouldn't be expected. But that's the rarefied air that Zach Edey has reached. It's a bit of a blessing and a curse. He's been unbelievable. 40 points for him. That's spectacular. 40 and 16. And he had his 40 and 16 on really high volume, but to be as effective as he was on that volume really says something. Because there was a real stretch where everyone knew the ball was going to Zach Edey, and he was still either scoring or getting fouled every single time. He hits 14 of 22 free throws. Not great. There was the air ball there with about 30 seconds to go that wasn't ideal, but he's absolutely dominant. You just don't see things like this happen. And I know, the social media discourse about him is ridiculous. It's not hard to find. It's all asinine, but what he's done and what he is doing right now is truly, truly out of this world. It's hard to put into words how good he has been for Purdue. It really is. It's one of the special runs you'll ever see. You're never going to see someone quite like him again. It's really been something. Don't overlook Fletcher Loyer in this game if you're a Purdue fan. I know he was only 4 of 12 from the field, but the guy was fearless. He really was. I'd love to see how many of those misses were offensive rebounds for Purdue, because he does have a tendency to do that, to miss a shot that turns into an offensive board. He was really good. He hit some free throws late, got the rebound, and ultimately got to be the guy to throw the ball in the air as Purdue reached the Final Four. But he had a nice game. It wasn't Braden Smith's best game, but he also helped you. He kept fighting the whole time against a really physical defense. A game that, I always thought Purdue was going to win. I didn't expect Purdue to lose. Even when it got rough early, I still felt all right about Purdue's chances. But, Purdue didn't get a cakewalk. Purdue didn't get, like they like to say on the Twitter, they didn't get a Mickey Mouse path to the Final Four. Purdue beat the 16 seed. Purdue beat a conference champion in the round of 32 from a respectable league. Purdue beat Gonzaga, a program that was in its 9th straight Sweet 16, and then it beat the SEC champion, who looks like it's going to close the season 5th at KenPom. Purdue played a legitimate path to get to the national title. To get to the Final Four. Not the national title yet. We'll talk about the 11th seed. But Purdue did it, and Purdue earned it. Purdue, with the exception of this Tennessee game, Purdue didn't really struggle. And, when you look at it, I guess we'll talk about what this means now. Obviously, this means a ton. It goes without saying. When you haven't done this in 44 years, it's going to mean a ton when it happens. Look at Robbie Hummel tearing up on the air on the Westwood One national radio broadcast. Look at Rob Blackman giving a tribute to the Purdue fans who have passed on, who weren't able to watch the game on Earth, but certainly saw it from up above. One of the more beautiful tributes you'll see from all of this. Look at the reaction from former players, like Robbie Hummel on the Goodman and Hummel podcast, talking about Jawan Johnson, FaceTiming him from overseas to talk about it. And so many players on Twitter, on social media, talking about doing it for Matt Painter, doing it for the program. This means a lot to a lot of people. Look up at the stands in Detroit. How many fans were in tears because Purdue finally reached the pinnacle of the sport for the first time in 44 years, for the first time with a three-point line. This means a lot to a lot of people. It's what sports are all about. It's in particular what college sports are all about. It's a really, really cool moment. It's an unbelievable statistic that Purdue went 44 years without making a Final Four. I guess now that that streak is over, we can just talk about how improbable it was that it took that long. I wasn't around for 88 when Purdue lost up at the Pontiac Silverdome to Mitch Richmond and Kansas State. I wasn't around for 94. I was around for 2000, but I don't remember it. I was old enough to know what was going on when Robbie Hummel got hurt in 2010 and 2011. And those two teams were good enough to do it. I was in school for Isaac Haas breaking his elbow. That team would have had to go through Villanova, but it was really, really good. It was good enough to be a Final Four team. I was in school. I was in Louisville for Virginia in 2019. I've seen everything, and it just everything, at least under Matt Painter. It doesn't make any sense how it took this long for Purdue to get back there. It almost defies gravity. It defies water finding its level for so long because Purdue had been so good and so consistently near the top or competitive towards the top of the sport that for it not to have a breakthrough in there just didn't make any sense. But now it's all gone, as it should be. That cloud hanging over Purdue's head has gone away. That cloud hanging over Matt Painter's head has gone away. I know Gene Cady didn't win it. He wasn't coaching, but for Purdue to get one while he was, he's around to enjoy it and celebrate it, I think that means a lot to a ton of people. There's just one more box to check now, and that's winning a national championship. Don't lose sight of the fact that Purdue does have a real shot to win this thing. UConn's very good. UConn is excellent. UConn is favored to win it, and I think that's probably right. I think UConn should be favored to win it. But Purdue has a real chance here. This obviously changes a lot of the narrative about Matt Painter. It changes a lot of the, best coach to never make it to the Final Four. All of that is now gone. I never liked that. I never loved that. It is what it is. You guys know how I feel about the NCAA tournament is the be-all, end-all for evaluation. He's no different of a coach than he was prior to tip-off against Tennessee, but he added a big line to his resume. He probably cemented himself as a Hall of Famer, which he deserves. He's one of the better coaches in the nation. Where does he rank? I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and try to rank it because that's a fool's errand. But to a segment of the Purdue population, to a segment of the national sports population, Matt Painter needed to get to a Final Four to validate himself as an elite coach. Now he's done that. I think there's a little bit of the same vibes towards Zach Edey, too, which is ridiculous. To pin all of the team's success or lack thereof on one player is pretty extreme. But the way each of his first 3 seasons ended, he, to some degree, he needed this. That cloud won't hang over his career. There won't be a yeah, but with Zach Edey's career. He's made it to the Final Four. He kind of carried Purdue on his back to the Final Four, but he did it. And he'll be out there in person to collect some of his National Player of the Year awards this week as a player, not just as a visitor. Again, an awesome moment, to see the reaction. That's what sports are all about. It really is. And it's a special moment for Purdue fans. Don't take it for granted. I don't think anyone does based off how long it took. It wouldn't make any sense to think that it's going to take another 44 years for Purdue to get back. But who knows? Enjoy it while it's here. And, we'll talk about the Final Four here in a sec after the break, but just a really, really great moment for Purdue. So hit the break here real quick, and when we get back, we will preview the Final Four. This episode is brought to you by me. Yes, me. When I'm not watching sports, or more accurately, talking about them, I'm talking insurance with the people of Indiana. As an agent with Indiana Farm Bureau Insurance, I want to help you protect what you've worked hard to achieve. From home and auto to life and business insurance, I'm here to help you. Give me a call at 317-692-7463 or email me at jordan.jones@infarmbureau.com, and let's protect you from life's everyday risks. So Purdue goes to the Final Four out in Phoenix this week. As I'm recording this here Tuesday night, I think they just got out there. Look, good fortunes in terms of draws in the NCAA tournament hasn't always mattered a whole lot for Purdue. It just hasn't. I mean, you can look at history with getting an 8 seed in the Elite Eight in 2000, a 15 seed in the Sweet 16 in 2022, a team you already played in 1988. Whatever it is, it hasn't always mattered. But it's impossible to be upset about getting an 11 seed in the freaking Final Four. That's big time. That's a nice break if you're Purdue. NC State's on one heck of a heater. It's won 9 in a row. It entered the ACC tournament 17-14. Probably going to fire Kevin Keats, and now that certainly is not the case. How much does it have left in the tank? We're going to find out. At some point, you do expect a little regression to the mean, but it hasn't happened yet. And does NC State have another game or two in it? Maybe. I do wonder, NC State just beat a really big rival in Duke to get to the Final Four, first time in 41 years. Pretty big deal. Are they still there, mentally, physically, emotionally? Where are they at? Because, this is a weird situation where most of the time, even when you're in Purdue's shoes, where you snapped a drought, or you're in Alabama's shoes where you're there for the first time ever, at least for those teams, it was not necessarily expected. Probably was expected for Purdue. For Alabama, not totally unexpected. For NC State, this came out of nowhere. 2.5 weeks ago, they were dead in the water, and now they're in the Final Four. It's pretty crazy. I guess 3 weeks ago, but the same goes for Purdue a little bit. NC State's back on campus. It's back in Raleigh, where its fan base is very fired up about beating Duke. That's a really, really big deal for NC State, because that's a rivalry that it's not had a ton of success in. It does that on the biggest stage, which is remarkably cool if you're a Wolfpack fan, which you probably aren't, because if you were a Wolfpack fan, you would probably be listening to Wolfpack and Beyond rather than Boilers and Beyond. But it's a lot to bounce back from emotionally. Same deal for Purdue. You celebrate on the court, and you hear Fletcher Lawyer talk about looking up and seeing fans crying in the stands. You get back to the airport, and there are hundreds of people waiting for you. You've got the Purdue exponent, people just taking pictures with Trey Kaufman-Wren on campus. It's a lot. This is a really big deal for Purdue. Purdue's got to maintain that focus. Now, it was on campus for less than 48 hours between getting back from Detroit and heading to Phoenix. It's out there now. So I don't know how big of a distraction it is, but Purdue's got to lock in here, because if you don't take NC State seriously, you're going to find yourself in an awkward position, and that's not where you want to be. I don't think there have been any red flags about Purdue taking things seriously. Purdue has done that all year long. Purdue has done a great job of not taking things too seriously, of staying loose and not allowing the pressure to outweigh the pleasure of winning and the joy of the process, to quote 2016 Joe Madden with the Cubs. But there haven't been red flags. You just got to get over that one last hump and get to where you want to go. In terms of the Final Four as a whole, I'm not going to sit here and deny that UConn would be a real bear to deal with in the national championship game. That would be a really, really tough matchup. I'm not gonna sit here and deny it. UConn looks awesome. Teams do not go on 30-0 runs in the Elite Eight. It just doesn't happen. That's what UConn's doing. Teams aren't number 1 in offense and number 4 in defensive efficiency on KenPom. That doesn't really happen. That's dominant. That's what UConn is. But this is a 40-minute game. Anything can happen. Edey versus Klingon would be a fascinating matchup. I don't think Purdue could afford a poor shooting game around Zach Edey, but it's one of the best three-point shooting teams in America, statistically. Even after that game against Tennessee, where it struggled, Purdue's number 2 in the country in three-point percentage, 40.6% on the year. So it's entirely possible. It's entirely possible that Purdue could outscore UConn. It really is. Bama could give Purdue a good game. Bama could give UConn a good game. Bama could also lose to both by 30. Alabama making 19 threes and still losing to Purdue was one of the more wild stats of the season. Alabama only shooting 18 two-point shots in that game is one of the more wild stats of the season. That was something else up in Canada. But, if Purdue gets a rematch there, great. I think you feel all right about it. I would not bet on Alabama to beat UConn, but anything can happen. NC State specifically here, because that's where Purdue starts. That's where Purdue's got to win. Purdue's about a 9.5-point favorite. KenPom has Purdue by 11, 82% win percentage for Purdue. You got a really good guard. DJ Horn's really good. He's a really good player, scores a lot for him, can really shoot it from three, shooting over like 43% from outside. He takes a boatload of shots. He's taken just a ton of shots for him. Crazy high usage. He's a really good player. Purdue will have to keep an eye on him because Purdue has, at times this year, let guards really get going on it. You look at Mark Sears, 35 points. You look at Boo Buie and what he did a couple of times. Dalton Connect's more of a wing, but Purdue really struggled with him. Now, this is normal. When you play great players, you're going to struggle to stop them because that's what makes them great. They're really hard to stop. But that's going to be a key matchup. The DJ Burns thing is really interesting. Obviously, he's a different style of big with how big he is from a weight perspective. He's kind of like a freshman year Travion Williams, bigger than a freshman year Caleb Swanigan. I mean, it's a really, really interesting player here that there aren't a ton of comps for. He only plays about 60% of NC State's minutes, which equates to 24 minutes per game or so. How does that translate when you're guarding Zach Edey? Keeping him out of foul trouble is going to be big for NC State. I think that's a real concern. They've got Ben Middlebrooks behind him. They've got Diarra. I think it'd be a real challenge for those guys to match up with Zach Edey. I know NC State likes to play single coverage against bigs. Will they do that? I don't know. Statistically, when you just look at this, NC State doesn't look like some tremendous team, but it's hot right now, and that's kind of all that matters. It's playing its best basketball at the right time of the year. Purdue is rightfully massively favored coming into this. The national conversation is really leaning towards a Purdue-UConn Final Four. That's fine. If Purdue comes out and plays well, Purdue is going to beat NC State. I have no doubt about that. Purdue starts turning the ball over, all bets are off. Purdue has a really bad three-point shooting day, all bets are off. But if Purdue plays even competitively well, I expect Purdue to win the game. And then if you get UConn in the championship game, you see what happens. Same deal with Bama. Bama wouldn't be an easy out. But if you get UConn in the championship game, look, you would get the two best teams in the country matching up in a sport that rarely gets the two best teams in the country playing one another at the end of the season. Houston in there as well. Brutal way that ended with Jamal Shed getting hurt. Houston was right there with them. You don't get the two best teams often. That would be a real joy for college basketball. That would be a great thing. We'll ultimately see. It's going to be a good Final Four. Purdue. It's a new experience for Purdue, but with how locked in this team has been, I think you should feel pretty good about Purdue getting to Monday. And at that point, all bets are off. We'll see what happens. It's 40 minutes away from a one shining moment that would end with Purdue. Purdue's 80 minutes from it right now. It's not all that far away. Wanted to close out with Q&A. Got a lot of good questions here. Thank you guys for sending them in. I always appreciate you guys. Quick thank you to everyone who's listened throughout this year. I've gotten a lot of really, really nice messages from some of you guys in the last few weeks. Thank you guys. They mean more than I can describe. I love doing this. I love interacting with you guys. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. And thank you guys for sending in questions. We'll start with some DJ Burns stuff because he's the storyline. First question, only watched Burns for the last couple weekends. He uses his weight and patience to get to his spot effectively. Will he be able to do that against Zach Edey while giving up around 80 pounds? And this related question, how many fouls will Burns have by the 10-minute mark in the first half? It's going to be an interesting matchup. He does have a quick first step. For a guy that big, he's got a quick first step, a little reminiscent of Travion Williams at times, because he could do that every once in a while. Not all the time, but he had that in him a little bit. I think you feel good if you're Purdue having Zach Edey. I mean, Zach Edey's the best big man in the country. You just can't get baited into a foul. You know, it's something with Burns. I think he's a heady enough player. But if Zach Edey can just kind of control that matchup, Burns gets in foul trouble. I think he probably will. It's more than likely. He seemed to be in foul trouble some in the tournament. It's not like I've watched NC State religiously. I certainly didn't pay much attention during the regular season. Never in a million years would it have crossed my mind that NC State would be who Purdue's playing in this thing. But, you know, if you're Zach Edey, I mean, you just don't let him get to that spin move and get a layup. Make him hit a jump shot. Make him hit a long hook. I mean, you just play the numbers. And that's something Purdue's really good at doing defensively. Purdue is really good at playing the percentages. That you're not going to hit tough twos over and over all game. And if you do, like Jalen Hood-Schifino at Mackey last year, you just kind of have to tip your cap because, you know, the numbers tell you that that's a poor way to go about winning games. Outside of Zach Edey, which player is most crucial for Purdue to beat NC State? I always say Braden Smith is my answer to this, pretty much no matter what. When he plays at an elite level, Purdue is unbelievably good. He is phenomenal. When he's playing at a high level, Purdue's tough to beat. Purdue's tough to beat nonetheless, but it just gets raised when Braden Smith is wheeling and dealing like he was against Gonzaga. I would go with him. If he plays really well and Zach Edey plays really well, Purdue's not going to lose. I feel very confidently about that. Every player can be the answer. I mean, you want Lance Jones and Fletcher Lawyer to play well, but when Purdue gets elite Braden Smith and elite Zach Edey, that's as good of a combo as you're going to find in college basketball. Same listener asked if I know of any watch parties. I don't. I would assume pretty much every bar in the state of Indiana, at least outside of Monroe County, will be a bit of a Purdue watch party. Certainly north of 70 it will be. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of Purdue people out and about. Check Purdue Alumni Club stuff. I know they do a lot of stuff, so check that out. Yeah, I don't have a great answer there, but check Purdue Alumni Club stuff would be my best guess. Now that Matt Painter has made a Final Four, who do you think the best coach in the country is that is yet to make a Final Four? I hate this type of conversation. As you know, it's real. I get it. There's got to be a new answer now because Matt Painter was that answer for a number of years, especially after Scott Drew made his Final Four. What do you make of guys like Randy Bennett? You know, he's been at St. Mary's forever, hasn't made a Final Four. How realistic is it to make one at St. Mary's? You saw it in the tournament this year. Like Greg Campy's been at Oakland forever and has done a great job, but you're not going to make a Final Four at Oakland. As much as I, hate saying that as someone who really likes Valparaiso basketball. Homer Drew wasn't going to make a Final Four at Valpo. It doesn't make him less of a coach. It just means you're at a school where you're not going to make a Final Four. So for those guys, it's tough. Greg McDermott has done a great job at Creighton. I was just looking at KenPom, like going up and down the rankings. Who am I missing here? Yeah, I mean, Bruce Pearl did it. Tommy Lloyd is doing a great job at Arizona, but the tournament luck certainly hasn't gone his way thus far. I guess Shaka did it at VCU. I don't know. I'm scrolling through KenPom. It feels like a lot of these coaches have done it or are pretty young and really haven't had the chance to do it yet. So McDermott, maybe. Randy Bennett. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I go. That's a tough one. Someone will say it, like on Field of 68. Someone will say something, or on Eye on College Basketball, and I'll feel dumb because there's probably someone really obvious I'm forgetting right now. It's just not coming to mind. Tweet it at me. Let me know who I'm missing, because I probably am. Mick Cronin. Mick Cronin made one. UCLA made it in that bubble. What kind of recruiting impact does a Final Four appearance have for this Purdue program? Look, I don't know that it's going to change a ton from a Purdue perspective. I don't know that Matt Painter is the type to drastically deviate from the approach that got him to this point. Purdue has done this on the back of some rather unusual recruiting strategy. I mean, Purdue reached the point, and it's been well documented, where Matt Painter couldn't handle having a team that couldn't shoot anymore. He had some athletes that couldn't shoot. And Purdue has prioritized skill. Purdue has prioritized winning as an attribute. And you see that. It's worked. Look at the two best players on this team. Zach Edey had like 2 or 3 Power 5 offers, and Braden Smith had 1 from Purdue. Those guys were not highly recruited players. They're first team all Big Ten. One's back-to-back National Player of the Year. The other is probably going to be a preseason All-American as a junior next year for a 5'10" white kid from Westfield. I mean, this is not exactly the traditional recruiting path, but it's done wonders for Purdue. Purdue's on guys very early. Like, Purdue was on Jaden Ivey incredibly early before he started to blow up a little bit. And by the time Purdue had him in the fold, then it got out that Purdue really kind of had a steal there. Purdue was on, guys like Trey Kaufman-Wren and Caleb First really early, highly recruited guys that Purdue ended up getting. So I don't think a ton's going to change. I don't expect Purdue to go star chasing, just blindly. I don't want to say blindly, because coaches do evaluate it. Everyone evaluates. But I don't expect Purdue to start being in the mix for half of the McDonald's All-American team. I don't expect that. But it certainly helps build the brand of the program. That narrative that Purdue's guards can't succeed, or that all Purdue does is feed the post. I think that sort of died with Carson Edwards and Jaden Ivey and now Braden Smith. Now Purdue has shown that you can make a Final Four in West Lafayette, and maybe Purdue can win a national championship and reach the mountaintop of the sport that it's waited so long to get to. But I don't expect Purdue to deviate a ton from the approach that got it here. I don't see that happening. Is Zach Edey in the discussion of the top college player to ever play? Does a title change that? Comparing eras of college basketball is really hard. I look at Purdue alone, and this is much easier for Purdue than it is to the entire nation, but at Purdue alone, how do you compare Rick Mount in the late 60s to Glenn Robinson in the early 90s to Zach Edey in the early 2020s? Just 3 very different eras of college basketball. I don't know how you compare them. I really don't. You can make an argument at Purdue alone for each of those 3 to be the best player to ever play at Purdue. And it's hard to argue with any of them. You can make a very compelling argument for all 3. If Zach Edey were to win a national championship, I think the majority of the Purdue fan base would probably consider him the best to do it. Maybe the plurality, I don't know. But I think he'd be the leading vote getter. Nationally, I mean, probably not. Again, how do you compare him to Pistol Pete, who played in a time where integration was not all that widespread in the South? That feels like that deserves an asterisk next to it. But he's the men's all-time leading scorer. How do you compare him to someone like Leitner, from a decorated accomplishments, a Christian Leitner, a Tyler Hansbrough, these guys that were just phenomenal players. I mean, it's really hard. It really is. I don't know. But I think a title, changes a lot. I mean, a title absolutely cements him as an all-time great in college basketball. I know there's not a college basketball Hall of Fame. It's all one Hall of Fame. And I don't know how many players get inducted based off college accomplishments alone. But with a national title, Zach Edey probably deserves that. What's the prediction on percentage of fans in Phoenix for each fan base? I really have no idea here. NC State hasn't been there in 41 years. I'd think they'd travel fairly well, but it also came out of nowhere. Like, NC State fans weren't thinking 3 weeks ago that they'd be flying to Phoenix to watch the Wolfpack in the Final Four. They thought they'd be talking about their new coach on message boards and having meltdowns and flight tracking and all of that. This came out of nowhere. Like, Purdue fans have kind of been planning this. I mean, I know a lot of Purdue people that had flights booked, that had hotels booked. I mean, this isn't news. I'm sitting by a guy at Little Caesars Arena, and the game hadn't been over for more than 2 minutes before he says, "Oh, my wife got our flights booked." This didn't come out of nowhere. For NC State, it did. How well do they travel? We'll see. I'd assume fairly well. I know nothing about Alabama's basketball fan base. They have a lot of fans. Do they travel for basketball? I really don't know. I say that as more of a question than an answer. UConn, I'm sure, travels pretty well, but there's not a ton of novelty around it. UConn's made a lot of Final Fours. So, I don't know. I expect there to be a sizable Purdue portion. It's the Final Four, so there are plenty of folks there that aren't affiliated with any teams that are just kind of there to watch. It'll be my first time going to a Final Four, so I really don't know what to expect. Atmosphere-wise, I have no clue what to expect from basketball inside a football stadium. A lot of unknowns here, but I'll happily report back. A programming note real quick. Yes, I will be out in Phoenix. I am not bringing my microphone with me, so I will not record an episode until Tuesday night or Wednesday night after the Final Four. I will do so upon my return to Indiana. I don't really know the logistics of bringing a microphone. Like, I don't know how these things travel. I know Gary Parrish has complained about it before. This is kind of new for me, like flying somewhere. I've driven with this a lot. I've done this podcast in a lot of places, but the microphone won't be coming with me. So I won't have a episode until after the Final Four is over. But I wanted to close this question from Sam, a great listener to the show, good friend of mine. When you look back in 10 years, what will you remember most about this magical season? Sam, I'll say this. It's not over yet. So, we can have a better answer next week when we know how this ended. It's obviously redemption. That's the storyline here. Yes, Purdue has the parallel of Virginia, and that's what everything is going to get compared to this week. It already is. It's the conversation. It's not the same, but it's, of course, similar. Both lost to a 16 seed, and then the year following got back there as a 1 seed and went and made the Final Four. Virginia ended up winning the title. We'll see if Purdue wins the title. But it's the idea of redemption. It's how well Purdue handled it. It's Purdue just being all business all year. Purdue winning another Big Ten. Purdue getting back as a 1 seed. and then Purdue getting to the Final Four. It's the idea of redemption. It's the idea of, a streak ending. It's Purdue finally doing it, right? It's this cloud that isn't over the Purdue program anymore. It is the trump card that other schools can't use on Purdue. It's Zach Edey cementing himself as an all-time great in the sport of college basketball. It's Matt Painter, finally getting there. It's a lot of things. And my goodness, it could be Purdue winning its first NCAA tournament in school history. There's a lot going on here. There's a lot going on to this question. But yeah, this has been a tremendous season for Purdue. I know this is like the weight of the world being lifted off the shoulders of the Purdue fan base. I know it. I'm there with all you guys. But this season has been really special. Purdue's 33-4 going to the Final Four. It's the most wins in school history. It's got to be the fewest losses in some time. I mean, they probably had like a 4-0 season back in 1822 or something. And yes, I know that's hyperbole. The school wasn't around then. But this has just been a tremendous season. And I guess we'll know for sure how it gets remembered most after the dust settles in Phoenix. But that's a great question. And it's one that, this season is going to be remembered for a long, long time for a lot of reasons. There's not just one thing about this season that's made it special for Purdue. But that's all I've got for today. Thank you all for spending your time with me. I appreciate you all who have listened all season. Congratulations, Purdue fans. This is well-earned, well-deserved for a fan base that has longed for this for so many years. Enjoy the Final Four. Safe travels to those of you heading out to Phoenix. If you see me out there, come say hey. I hope to see you. If you don't already, follow the show on Twitter @BoilersBeyond. Send me anything you want. DM, tweet it to me. Email the show, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. And be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you don't miss a thing. I'll be back after the Final Four concludes, after the national championship game if Purdue's there, and we'll put a wrap on this special season. Thank you all. Take care and enjoy the game. Zzz.